Laura Carney is a writer and copy editor in New York. She's been published by the Washington Post, the Associated Press, Runner's Guild, Upworthy, and many other places. She's worked as magazine copy editor for the last 20 years for publications including Good Housekeeping, Vanity Fair, and GQ. Her book, My Father's List, How Living My Dad's Dreams Set Me Free, was released from Postal Press in June 2023. And we are here to celebrate it this evening with Steve Fisher, who's a podcaster, actor, producer, director, and the writer of over 100 TV shows, movies, and plays, plus hundreds of magazine articles. So he's been a very busy man. He's also a father to 3 grown children, 2 cats and a dog, and a grandfather to 5, soon to be 6 grandchildren. Is that grandchild with us now?
We don't know, because that child doesn't talk to the rest of the family.
Oh, yeah.
So we have no idea if the
Schrodinger's grandchild will be with us.
I might have 6. I don't know. It's going to save me a lot at Christmas time. I'm not going to.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Well, without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn over the mic to these two.
Thank you.
Woo.
We're going to start. First of all, Laura was a guest, my first guest on the 4th season of my podcast, Life Slices. And that's airing now. So you can run home and listen to it if you don't get it all right here. So I'm going to start with a question that I think almost stumped you the first time around was, who is Laura Carney?
Oh, I don't remember what I said before. A writer?
Oh, this is a test. That's it? That's what you said?
It is? Oh,
Yes,
good. At least I'm consistent. Yeah, a writer.
And what inspired you to become a writer?
Oh, I think I was born with it. I think I fought it for a while when I thought I was a fine artist, and then eventually it just won.
So it's a genealogical affliction.
I think so.
You're born with it. You
Affliction
can't get rid of
it's
it.
a gift and a curse, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say.
Then who was Michael J. Carney?
Oh gosh. Jack of all trades, writer, singer, comedian, father, husband,
That's
brother,
that's
uncle.
the key thing. You lost your dad at a young age. You were 25, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And it was devastating. It was a tragic accident, so it was not planned for. Not that you ever planned to die. I know a couple of people who have, but not me. And your brother found his bucket list. Was that going through his stuff?
My brother had a few things of my dad's for about 13 years, and he didn't know he had a box, he didn't know what was in the box. And apparently my dad had written this bucket list when he was 29, and this was the year 1978, so nobody even used the term bucket list yet. It was just a list of things he hoped to do in his life. I believe he titled it Things I Would Like to Do in My Lifetime, and I kind of love that he underlined the would like, so because they're not must do's, it's just experiences he wanted to have. And my mom says that he wrote it shortly after I was born.
Oh.
And yeah, he died. It's interesting you said that, because doing his list for him and finishing those unfinished items and then writing this book, his spirit has become so present in my life that now whenever someone says I lost him, I actually cringe a little bit, because it's like, oh, he's still here, and I feel like that's really been some of the gift of it. No, here.
Oh, okay, all right.
It's here.
Thought he was maybe watching.
Yeah, but when he died, I was only 25 years old. I had just moved to New York for a magazine internship. I had just met the man who would later be my husband, and he actually lived right here. I was friends with my friend Ed over there. He lived right here in Seattle, and I lived in Delaware, as I was telling Milo earlier. And he was like, "What's this girl in Delaware doing, writing to me every day? What's going on here?" And he encouraged me to not only move to New York for this magazine internship, which only paid $10 a day, but I didn't care because it was New York and it was an art magazine. It was
How
very
do you survive
exciting.
in New York on $10 a day?
I think I had $1,000 in my bank account when I moved there, and that helped. And then
That'll
I sold my car. I sold my car to my mom, so then that helped. But yeah, actually, when I met Steven, that was his name, and he's now my husband. His name is still Steven. When I met him, he sort of felt for me and the fact that I had moved there with such little money, and I couldn't find a job either. It took me 2 months to find a job, and when I finally did, it was Outback Steakhouse. But anyway, Stephen just started sending me care packages every 2 weeks because he had been through this. He lived in Pennsylvania, and then he ended up moving here after living actually in I think a couple of different places. He moved to Maryland, he moved to North Carolina, moved to Portland, and then he ended up settling here. So it's really weird. It's totally coincidental. I didn't plan this, but today is actually the 20th year anniversary of the day I came out here and took Stephen away from Seattle.
Okay, but that's
And he
good.
moved, but a week beforehand was when my dad died.
Mm.
So that trip that we took across the country together, which was supposed to be this incredibly romantic, road trip, now had a very different tone to it.
I can imagine. And he didn't jump out of the car at any point wanting to get back to Seattle.
No,
He stuck with you.
yeah. Even though, and it's interesting because I was supposed to drive, and I actually just had my last bookstore event was in Denver. And the reason I went to Denver was because the part of the trip I ended up driving was through the Rocky Mountains. I don't know that we planned that so well because I now become quite car phobic and I remember insisting that we not get an SUV because it was a teenager who had been driving an SUV who killed my dad. She was making a phone call.
That makes it doubly tragic. But it's always tragic. So when you found this list, what made you decide you had to fulfill it?
I just knew. I knew instantly. It was, I always call it a heart decision. I compare it to choosing to move to New York on $10 a day at an art internship and only $1,000 in my bank account, which it was a very uncertain decision to make, but I was 25 years old and it made sense to me. I had this feeling of this is going to be my life. Sometimes that happens, like I have to take this step. And, then when my husband ended up proposing to me 10 years later, that's the kind of decision you make in an instant because this is going to be my life. And then 6 months after our wedding was when my brother found a list and he showed it to us at his house. And I knew immediately this is going to be my life.
No, I don't remember my wife making that decision that quickly.
Really?
I think it was more like a year or two. The divorce was a lot quicker.
Oh.
Yeah. When you looked at this list, did it give you pause at all? Did you look at some of these things and going, how the heck am I ever going to do that?
Yeah. Yeah, speak with the president. It wasn't just take a picture with the president. It was speak with the president, correspond with the Pope, own a large house with our own land.
Did it specifically say the President of the United States?
No, and it's interesting you say that because I did take some poetic license with a couple of things.
Okay, like what?
Okay, so own a house with our own land. The way we did that one was, so when the pandemic hit, I had already now passed my deadline. I gave myself a 4-year deadline because the list said he hoped to live until the year 2020. That was actually the first item on the list. So I thought, okay, well then if this list was supposed to be alive until 2020, that's how long it will be alive. And then the pandemic happened and I thought, well, I'm gonna have to extend this now. And the pandemic actually ended up almost changing some of the rules for how I was doing the list. Like, for example, one of them was own my own tennis court. I had no idea how I was going to do that. Some people were like, oh, maybe you can like rent a neighborhood court or something and you put your name on it. And so my husband, I remember March 2020 very clearly. He's like, well, I'm going to buy you a ping pong table for your birthday. And that became like a tennis court because we didn't know in March 2020 if we'd ever leave the house again. And then that summer, we started running every single street in our town because we're both endurance athletes. And after we had covered every single mile of Montclair, New Jersey, we decided we owned our land. Because we work in New York and we were never home before the pandemic.
Okay.
And then we couldn't travel anymore, which, this book covers, I think at one point I counted about 15 different travel destinations, and that was becoming our life. And now we were stuck at home. And all we could do to scratch that itch was go camping. So we went out camping and I thought there were bears and I was terrified. And my husband starts setting up this tent and he says to me, oh, this is an extra large tent. And I thought, oh my God, that's the large house. because I had the way I was surviving the pandemic was I was reading Thoreau's Walden every day, and there's a sentence in Walden where he says, "The only house I've ever owned was a large tent." And I was like, okay, that counts. But but really, in all seriousness,
I wish I had talked to you before I bought my house. Could have saved a lot of money.
I mean, in all seriousness, though, what one of the things I started realizing as I was into, now year 3, year 4, year 5 of doing this project, was that each list item, it didn't have to be literally what I thought it was going to be, because what mattered was the lesson I was getting from it.
Right.
And every single time, the lesson was something that my dad wanted me to know, and maybe even already taught me, and I had forgotten.
What did he want you to know by jumping out of an airplane?
Oh, to cherish life, to enjoy it, to have thrills.
See, I do cherish life,
And that's
which is
why
why I'm
you
not
won't
jumping out of an airplane.
I realized as it came out of my mouth.
What were the biggest challenges you had? Which items gave you the most trouble?
I would say write and have a few novels published, which was number 3 on the list, I believe. That's how important it was to him, because my dad was a writer too. And
Go up these aisles and just slap your name on every.
oh yeah,
every
the
book
Jewish
you can
unit
find.
over there. Yeah, he self-published his book in the 70s, and I heard about this book my whole life, The Why Generation in a Why Not World. It was about how he felt that people from his generation in the 60s who were pretty revolutionary were now almost becoming somewhat apathetic in the 70s. Like they didn't care as much about changing the world anymore.
Mhm.
And really, I'm so happy he wrote it, because it became almost like his guide to life, and I really cherished it after he died. But for me to set out and write my own book was very intimidating, because it's like, well, God, he's the writer. I'm a journalist. I'm an essayist. I'm a TV recapper. I don't know if I'm a book author. And it took a lot of trial and error to have it be published in a mainstream way. I think is a miracle. It's very challenging to do that. There were so many steps along the way of this book, coming into being, that required a lot of faith.
Hold it up again.
It just
Right
required.
here. We need to sell these.
It required leaps of faith, similar to jumping out of an airplane required a leap of faith. And one of the things I was noticing is that the list items, each one was almost feeding off of the ones that came before. So because I had already done that, I could start approaching this, like, oh, that was okay. I could do that. And maybe I can have enough trust that I can make this happen too. And it really, having to pursue, write and have a few novels published, and I include my dad's novel in that, because my husband actually, as a secret, redesigned it and put it on Amazon. So you can buy it on there if you want to.
What was the name again?
The Why Generation in a Why Not World. That's what it's called. But, believing that I could figure it out, that really became the theme for this entire thing. Believing that whatever came, whatever happened, I could figure it out. And that definitely was a very different way of living for me.
So take us again to which were the most challenging?
Oh, yeah, the writing one. And then, also I would say the tennis one was pretty challenging.
Yeah.
Which I didn't think would be the case. Similar, there's elements of the writing one. I felt like, well, I'm already a writer, so maybe this will be okay. And with tennis, I already played tennis on my high school tennis team. So it was sort of like anytime there was something I thought I could do because I had experience with it at first, it ended up being completely opposite of that. So I got out on the tennis court. It said beat a number 1 seed in a tennis tournament, except the paper had folded on the list. So all I saw was beat a number 1 seed in tennis. So I thought, I'm going to do this in one day. This is easy peasy. And I went out there, and my husband's best friend is actually a number 1 seed. He's a tennis coach. And he said, oh, it's okay. I'm going to go easy on you. And he didn't go easy on me. And he was just like, they were all over the court. And I leapt for one, and I landed hard on the ball of my foot, on my left foot, and I felt a snap. And then it turned out later I had torn a tendon in my foot, and I had to get foot surgery. Even though I ignored it for months, eventually I did have to get foot surgery.
Was that on the list?
No, that was absolutely not on the list.
No ad-libbing.
But it's interesting though, because I thought the tennis one was going to be the easiest one of all 54. Already a tennis player. It was the hardest.
Wow.
Probably even harder than even everything I just shared about getting this book published, probably even harder than that. Because this just took finding the faith. But recovering from that surgery and letting my husband help me while I was recovering from the surgery, that took finding my heart. That took letting someone into my heart enough to let them help me. And I think sometimes when you go through grief, you create almost like an armor around you and you shut down a little bit. And I recognized during that time when, he was having to help me walk to the bathroom, he was having to bring oatmeal to me in the living room. And I realized that I hadn't fully let him in, even though at this point, we were married. We'd been together for, gosh, I want to say 17, 18 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you were just letting him in.
All the way.
Wow.
Yeah, all the way. Because something about me was still afraid of this is my partner, and what if something happens to him too?
Now, I was just thinking, as far as getting your own tennis court, couldn't you just buy your high school? Then you would have had the tennis court would have been attached.
But I don't know. Well, I couldn't own a large house the traditional way either.
Okay. Have you completed all the items on the list now?
Yeah, as of December 2022, I have.
Yes. What was that like when you finished that last item?
It felt like I was tired in a way I have never been tired before. Just the emotional exhaustion of it. It felt like I remember describing it to my husband as I feel like I'm at the bottom of the ocean, but not in a bad way. Like I've let go completely, and now here I am, and it felt peaceful. It felt almost, it felt like the opposite of what it was like when I found out my dad had just died, which to me felt so out of control and almost meaningless. Like it just happened because of someone making a phone call. And when that happens, you feel like, God, I didn't think it would be that way. It's such an everyday thing that you see people doing, and it's like, it really does kill people.
Yes.
So for it to be your dad, who's like your hero, and have it be like that, it sort of, for me, it made me somewhat bitter and jaded about humanity.
Mm-hmm.
But after the 6 years of doing this and watching the ways that people I knew, people I loved, strangers who ended up becoming lifelong friends, showed up for me and helped me with each of these items, now I was in a totally different state of mind, which was people really do show up for you. And what I had learned was, yeah, things happen in life and they're painful and they're hard and they hurt, but there's just so much joy and there's so much connection in the world. And I had now learned how to embrace that. So the way it felt for me was, even though I was still this one person who was kind of the container of all of this, and I could now rest, I also almost felt like I had like a crowd of people cheering for me, which I never would have expected. And it was so beautiful.
Are all those people expecting a free copy of the book?
No.
Oh, that's good.
They've been buying.
That's very good. You said you met a president. One of the items was to meet a president. Which president did you choose, and how did you get to meet him? I was going to say him or her, but we haven't had a her president.
Not yet. No,
Not yet.
But
Keep rooting for one.
yeah, I actually ended up emailing through my research, I found the right people. I wrote to every single living president, and I really wasn't sure how that was going to go. And I did an interview on Inside Edition, and someone saw it, and they wrote to me, they emailed me, and they said, it was a guy named Mike Hicks from Alabama. He said, if any president will do, you should know that President Jimmy Carter still teaches Sunday school most Sundays of the year in Plains, Georgia. And he was 93 years old.
Right. Yeah, this was a while back.
So yeah, it was the beginning of
it's not
my
teaching
project.
Sunday school anymore.
No, he, I wasn't sure, though, how to get close enough to him to actually have a conversation. I knew I could get to the church and I could get the lesson, but I didn't know how I was going to make that happen. And I sort of tried to downplay that part as I convinced my husband to fly down to Atlanta, Georgia with me. And just so you know, my husband's a very practical person, so that took a lot of convincing. And when we got there, I was really insistent that we climb Stone Mountain because that was the only place on the list. You know, this particular list item adventure was the only place my dad had been to. You know, I had pictures of it. My mom went to school at University of Georgia, and my dad went down there to visit her. So my husband climbed Stone Mountain with me. He took pictures of me at the top, you know, recreating my dad's like triumphant pose. And because we did it at sunset, we got to the hotel at 11 o'clock at night, which was a little scary and a little bit treacherous. But we were there at the exact same moment that Jimmy Carter's biographer was checking in. So we ended up having a conversation with him in the parking lot, and I had been binging everything Jimmy Carter for weeks. So I got to talk to Art Milnes, one of his biographers, about Jimmy Carter, but he wouldn't tell us his name. It was really weird. like he's like, oh yeah, I've met Delbia, I've met Bill Clinton a few times, and I'm like, who is this guy? Is this for real? Like he kept inviting us back to his hotel room for wine, and we're like, we're good, it's okay. And
Sure.
he's like, oh, don't you think Jimmy Carter knows you're
I want to
here?
go back to my hotel room. I know all the presidents.
Yeah. Like, don't you think he's gonna call the hotel? I'm sure he knows you're here. And I was like, what? Like, what is this? And then I went back to the room and I Googled Art Milnes and I found him with every single one of the presidents, and even a picture of him with Jimmy Carter in his kitchen because he had spent the night at his house. So I thought, okay, this might work. and the funny thing is, I'm still friends with Art Milnes to this day, but I still don't know if he put in a good word for us. Because by the time we did get to the church, after the service, we went up to take our picture with Jimmy Carter and Rosalind, and he did have a few sentences with me. And you're not supposed to do that. I mean, they even said before the Sunday school lesson, don't talk to him. He takes pictures with hundreds of people, or he did at the time.
So he had no idea why you were there.
I believe in my heart of hearts that Art Milnes told him.
Okay, well, you connected me with Art Milnes, and he's going to be on my podcast, so I will ask him.
Is he really?
Yes.
I want you to, because I want to get to the bottom of this.
I'll do my best.
That's too humble to tell me.
He may not tell me anything.
Yeah, Art Milnes
Which is going to make for a very short.
He's never admitted to it. I think he likes to keep it a mystery. No, but I mean, he is a speechwriter for prime ministers in Canada,
Yes.
and he's also just a very humble guy.
Yeah, but have you ever heard prime ministers in Canada speak?
Yes.
So that makes his career a little questionable.
Oh, no.
But we'll get to the bottom of that.
I'm
too.
sure they're the most polite leaders in the world. They are Canadian.
So you took a very private journey and you put it in this book. How difficult was it to write the book?
There were parts that were such a joy, that felt like such a privilege, that I was getting to describe these adventures I was going on in present day, because I really was beginning to feel like my dad's spirit, maybe part of him was still here. Maybe he was guiding me. Maybe he was doing these things with me. Because things like that, like meeting Art Milnes, things kept happening like that, that I couldn't have predicted. I couldn't have planned for. And now this was sort of shifting how I felt about uncertainty. So I would say that those parts were I would be laughing while I was writing because they were such a joy to be writing. But then, of course, I also knew I needed to write about his funeral. I knew I needed to write about our relationship towards the end of his life, which was challenging due to my depression. And I now believe he might have had depression too, because he wasn't, I don't think he knew how to help me when that was happening. And my mom did everything for me during that time. And that's a hard thing to relive, and it was hard for her to relive because my teenage years were not easy. So yeah, having to make myself remember that and describe it as part of a story. I honestly, when I wrote about his funeral, it happened when I was stuck on that couch after my surgery. And the only reason I could finally make myself do it was because I couldn't go anywhere.
And how much time was there between the actual funeral and when you had to write about it?
I want to say 15 years.
Oh, so it was a long time.
15 years, yeah.
Did you have any insights at that time that, looking back, you didn't think about at the time?
How much certain people helped me. people who were there,
Mm-hmm.
people who went through that with me. My dad was beloved. He had so many friends, so much family, and we were all missing him. But he also was the kind of person who, because he had such varied interests, and because he was a salesman and he was a very outgoing person, so he sort of had friends all over the place. And I think because he was that way, it made it almost hard to place him. So when he died, it became this thing where I felt like almost like, where's his family? Where's our tribe? Who am I grieving with? So as I remembered how it actually was, it was what was popping into my mind was that, a lot of people loved him, and a lot of people experienced this with me, even though almost a kid at age 25, I sort of felt like I was going through it alone.
What did you learn about your dad in doing this bucket list? Any big surprises that would never have entered your mind?
That he was really serious about writing. He was really serious about it.
Mm-hmm.
He was a salesman when I was a kid, and this Y generation book would sit in his back seat, and I would be like super embarrassed about it because he would talk about it all the time. But and he used to tell us things like, "Oh, I came up with a pilot for a TV show. Let me tell you about it." And I found out in the first year of doing the list, I had this box of his stuff I'd never gone through, and I found a submission to a publisher in New York, and it was like a pilot for a TV show. Sure enough, that was a real thing he did. It was poems, it was songs, it was a treatment for a film. The Y generation book, the manuscript that was in there. Like, he had submitted a variety, like almost all fields of writing he had submitted to this publisher. And then I found the rejection letter too. And he never told us about that, and I think he just never tried again. And then it almost was starting to feel, as I was doing the list and as I was beginning to turn it into a book, like he was guiding me with that too, because I began to find other notebooks, and one was like these to-do lists of, organizing his life, and he was far more organized. I didn't think he was organized at all, and it turned out he has buy milk and then figure out my religion, like as a 29-year-old, and then paint baby's nursery. And, he had like these existential issues right next to the most mundane
I'm trying to figure
things.
out the connection between milk and religion.
Well, it almost felt to me,
Wine, I can understand.
I wasn't working full time in magazines anymore, and I was now pursuing this crazy thing of writing this book. And it felt to me like he was saying, you can organize yourself. You don't need someone else to do that, and showing me how he had done it. And that just kept happening. Then I found outlines of the Y generation, a year later, after I had finished my first submission to my agent. I found a briefcase, articles about how to self-publish. Like, just the timing of these things, the way they were showing up, and my starting to finally realize, even found like a vow he wrote to himself at age 22 of the writer he was going to become. So he really cared about this. And I don't want to get emotional talking about it, but you asked me, who is Laura Carney, and that defining myself as a writer was not always easy for me to embrace.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an easy life. It's filled with obstacles, and that's what my dad was, and now I'm really proud to have inherited that.
You said that writing this book helped you process your grief. In what ways? How did it do that?
I think when I made myself do things like write about his funeral, what I was doing, even though I was trying to write a good story, a memoir is, like, memoirs are important, but people aren't going to read it if it's not a good story. I was trying to do that. But also it was healing me, because I think I had PTSD. I think that's why it took so long. I haven't been diagnosed with it, so I'm not saying that, but I think that's why it took so long for me.
Any shrinks here?
Well, I'm just trying to be clear about that. To process a lot of these things. And there was something about taking these very traumatic, not very, I've had a pretty good life, but traumatic incidents in my life, and putting them into a story, and taking the good things too, and putting that right next to the more painful things. There was something about it that now was making it so that I wasn't afraid of those memories anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to accept them as part of a longer journey that I was on.
Right.
And, I don't know if that's something that people recommend for PTSD, but I found it to be incredibly healing. Because, I always hear about people who've had someone die. I don't like saying lost someone anymore, but had someone die. And they talk about it like there was my life before the death, and then there was the death, and then there's who I am now. Like it's all separated. And I think getting to take these experiences from my past and incorporating them with these adventures in my present and turning it into one narrative. What I'm now doing is I'm realizing, oh, this had to happen so that this could happen. This thing shaped me into becoming this, and in good ways, even if they were very painful and challenging at the time.
Yeah, now I know you don't like to use the term that you lost your dad, but in losing your dad, and in writing this book, you said you found yourself.
Yeah.
So what did you find out about you?
So many things. When I was a little girl, I was very shy and pensive. I used to, I remember my mom used to drop me off at school, and it was like this Catholic school, and I hated it. And I would sit there in the corner, and I had this printer. Remember the printer paper that had the little like holes on the
Yes.
side? That's how old I am. I'd had these reams of printer paper, and I would just sit there and I would draw, and I wouldn't talk to anybody.
I remember before they invented that paper. It shows how old I am. So don't
Yeah.
worry about that.
Thank you. But I was a shy kid, and my dad would make us perform. Like he would make us sing. He would make us stand up and sing in front of people, and he would record us. He was a singer himself, so he would record us singing with him. I have all these tapes of recordings he made, and to be someone who's that shy meant I wasn't using my voice a whole lot, and I was almost a little bit afraid of my voice, and certainly I think that got worse as I got older in some ways, because I think growing up female in the society I was growing up in was making it so that I started almost becoming a people pleaser and caring more about how other people felt about me than what I actually felt about anything I might be doing or any decisions I might be making. So making a choice like this to do 54 items that were the dreams of a man, in 1978, and to believe I could figure it out and that I could do it, what I think was really happening was I'm now claiming my voice. I'm saying I'm making very assertive choices here. I'm choosing to be the subject of my life, not just in a story, but in my life. And I'm still sort of navigating that now with being this author and being on a book tour and what am I going to do next? And it's like, well, I've learned now that I'm the subject, like I'm the decider here. And, I actually think that plays a role in distracted driving too, because I think we're living in a time where we have these gadgets, we have, so many modern conveniences that we almost are becoming less patient and almost less aware that we're even making choices every day of our lives. It becomes very easy to just sort of drift. So I think that probably the biggest thing that it taught me was that I have a powerful voice and I should use it.
Well, speaking of having a powerful voice, using
it sounds horrible when you say
I think it's time for you to read a little something from the book. Would everybody like to hear that?
Yes.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to read a little bit from the prologue. Okay. We were visiting my brother in Salem, Massachusetts when we found it. Oh yeah, my brother said, I wanted to show you this. When she returned, her long blonde hair matching the walls of the rustic kitchen, she was holding a small suede pouch with a drawstring. She turned it upside down and out tumbled a silver ring and a driver's license, along with 3 pieces of folded notebook paper. We found it when we were unpacking, Dave said. Do you know about this? I unfolded the papers and started reading. At the top of the first page was things I would like to do in my lifetime in my dad's handwriting. He wrote the list when he was 29, covering both sides of each page. The first item said, I would like to live a long, healthy life, at least to the year 2020. The last said he hoped to dance at his grandchildren's weddings. But both those goals were rendered impossible on August 8th, 2003, the day he was killed by a distracted driver. That summer, I was 25, pursuing my dream of becoming a writer in New York. My dad had encouraged this more than anyone, so I knew I couldn't give up on it. He wasn't there when I accomplished my goal of working at a women's magazine 8 years later, and he wasn't there 5 years after that when I needed him to walk me down the aisle. But on that afternoon in my brother's kitchen, I felt connected to him as we chuckled at his often indecipherable handwriting. I wondered aloud if he'd kept the list his whole life. He'd never told us about it. But then Dave remembered the World Series game he'd checked off. Look, he said, he even wrote the score. As proof, I asked. Then something strange happened. We realized that many of his want-to-dos were things we'd already done. I did that, I cried about number 31, get my picture in a national magazine. And you did that, I reminded my brother when we saw he'd wanted to record 5 songs. Dave recorded his with his a cappella group in college. All in all, there were 13 items we'd accomplished, not a small dent considering he wrote down 60. But in my father's entire lifetime, he'd only checked off 5. Item number 12 said, give my children the most love, the best education, and best example I can give. He never checked that one off, but he should have, because it's the reason I did this. I decided to finish the list. As soon as my husband, Stephen, suggested it, I saw my dad in my mind's eye, smiling and nodding.
How long did it take you to complete the list and the book?
6 years. I finished the list in 5 years and 11 months, and I finished the book a month later.
Now, last time we spoke, you had some interest in making it into a movie. Has anything more happened with that?
We've had some people show interest, but nothing.
But didn't write a check.
No.
The interest is meaningless until they write the check.
Well, I'll be sure to let you know.
Okay, very good. And who would you want to play you?
Oh, I can't answer that question.
I don't know. Who should play Laura? Any ideas?
Oh boy.
No ideas. No ideas whatsoever. No one has any clue.
Someone told me Elizabeth Olsen the other day. They said you have a quality. So
that would work.
Oh, you think? Thanks, Reddit.
Okay, call Elizabeth Olsen. Are there any questions in the group here? Does anybody have a question for Laura?
I do.
Okay.
Where are you headed after Seattle? What's your plan for the next month or so with your book tour?
I'm actually, believe it or not, taking 3 weeks off.
That's great.
This is my 15th event since June.
Oh, wow.
I need a little bit of a rest. I've been kind of country trotting, I guess you guys, not globe trotting, but country trotting. Yeah, Los Angeles is going to be my next one, and that's September 22nd at Zibby's Bookshop. I'm pretty excited about it.
I didn't think publishers let you take time off until you hit platinum.
Oh, no, it's okay. I actually did have had an event I was going to do, and we're postponing it, so it's kind of an accidental thing, but
Mhm.
yeah, it's kind of nice to have a couple of weeks. And it's my husband's birthday too coming up, so we have to go to the Mariners game.
Oh, absolutely. Does your husband have a bucket list?
Yes,
He does.
he has 6 items, and then now he also has a Mariners list where he's going to all 30. I don't know how he's chosen them, but he has 30 stadiums he wants to watch the Mariners play in. So we've already checked off 3 of them.
What would you suggest to anybody who wants to put together a bucket list?
I was talking to someone
And
about.
would you encourage them? to do
Yes,
that?
I would. I was talking to someone about this the other day because, sometimes people give you insights and you don't even know where they're going to come from. And I was doing this radio interview and this woman said to me, I read somewhere that before you found your dad's bucket list, you had written a values list. And I thought, oh God, where did I say that? Yeah, I guess I did. And so this was when I was working at Good Housekeeping, and there was this article, and it was about how these women, they had 2 groups of women, and they were trying to lose weight. And they had the first group write down all of their values for 15 minutes. And then they didn't do that for the second group. And the first group ended up losing 5 pounds, and the second group didn't. And I was about to get married, so I thought, okay, I'll try, typical, right? So I wrote down my values list and I started looking at it once in a while because I kept it. I put it in a notebook. And then as I started looking at it more and more often, I started recognizing how important that was, to actually write down on paper the things you care about in life, the things that matter to you. I feel like you need to do that first before you can write a wish list. Because by the time you get to the wish list, you're going to have a better understanding of who you are. So I think I needed to write that values list before I could get to the point where I was ready to own my life in a way. Because that's a commitment that's really hard for people to make. To say, I want to, go to the Grand Canyon. I want to, see an elephant up close. That's one of mine. I want to have these like awe-inspiring experiences, and they don't even have to be awe-inspiring. One of mine is I'd like to have a nice garden. It could be every day, but just things that are you choosing to say thank you for being alive. I feel like it's really important to do. It affects the way you experience your everyday life, and it changes your energy of how you live. Because I think if you're now saying, I care about what I'm doing, you start having agency. And it becomes a lot easier, I think, to overcome things that come your way in life that are difficult too.
You kind of suggested this, but the subtitle of the book is How Living My Dad's Dreams Set Me Free. How did that set you free?
In a lot of ways. But I think the main way is that it set me free from caring so much about what people think of me all the time. From letting my decisions and choices be guided by that. This was an unusual path to take, and it was mine, and it was the one I was supposed to take. And I think that's what we're all supposed to do, and it's not easy to hear the call of it and answer it and actually do it. But once you do, at least what my experience has been, once I started doing that, it's like a kind of freedom I can't fully describe.
So there's no sequel to this book?
I hope so.
Oh, okay. What would the sequel
we'll
be?
See. I'm working on it. One of the really cool things that happened as I was doing the list was, of course, as a journalist, I'm researching each of these items. And one of the cool things that happened was I started noticing there were all these badass women who had done a lot of these items. Like, the one in particular that always comes to my mind is the skydiving list item. I had no idea that the first famous skydiver was a woman. Her name was Tiny Broadwick. She worked in the circus. This is how far this goes back. She jumped out of hot air balloons. Like planes didn't exist yet. So it was a little bit of a shorter height. But then when planes were invented, she started jumping from those. And I think she was maybe 5 feet tall, but what she would do is she would go and she would train the military, and she would say, hey, I'm this little woman. Like, if I can do this, clearly you guys can do this too. And, there's others, I've collected now so many stories just like that, that I just kept thinking, how do I not know about this? A lot of history is written by men, so we miss a lot of that stuff. But I would love to see something like that, a collection of these women who did these incredible things. But it's not just like, feminist women or independent women who did stuff men could do. No, this is like, I was the first human to do this. And my husband, who's really great with titles of just about anything, but especially books, said I should call it A Woman Got There First. So that might be the next one. And then, of course, someone said, oh, well, are you the first woman who did your dad's bucket list? Will you be in? I was like, no.
I would like to see, I think you should write a history of the United States from a woman's perspective.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe it will end up sort of being that. Maybe it will be mostly American women.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
a lot of nasty language in that book. So we're almost out of time. There are a bunch of signed copies of the book available for anyone to buy. So please do buy them. And remember, when the movie comes out, if Elizabeth Olsen is not starring in it, I want you to write complaints to whoever the studio is.
Well, maybe you manifested it.
So is there anything else, any question you would like to answer that I haven't asked?
Oh, gosh. That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't think so, Steve.
It always stumps people.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
yeah.
Oh, what didn't I say?
Well, you know, I would like to pay a little bit more tribute to my husband than I did, just because here I am in Seattle and we couldn't make it so that he could be here too, but this is a place he loves. And it's a very literary place. You know, my experience, even just being here since yesterday, walking around this bookstore, I'm recognizing, oh, this is, you know, what's that song, like the house that made me? Like, this is the house that made Stephen. And, you know, I wouldn't be who I am doing what I'm doing if I didn't have him encouraging me and supporting me. And in that way, I'm very grateful to Seattle too.
That's nice. And while you're here, he's home cashing the checks.
Well, not yet, but maybe
Oh,
soon.
okay. All right. Again, anybody have any questions before we break and run for dinner? Yes.
I have a question. I also lost my father unexpectedly in my 30s, and I never went through and finished going through his stuff. So did you find that as you started going through his stuff, like you were trying to find connection with him and like to learn to I guess catch up on everything you missed? Because I still feel like there's stuff that I've missed.
Did I feel like I was catching up on things that I missed? Yeah, you know, I felt like I misjudged him sometimes. I felt like, you know, he had like a modesty about him. So he wasn't telling me about accomplishments with writing or, you know, things I was saying that I found in his notebooks. And to realize all the time, he actually was quite serious about it. Yeah, that I regretted at first that I missed it. I regretted in some ways that I misjudged him.
Mm-hmm.
But I also sort of felt like, you know, there's some reason I'm finding this right when I am. I really believe his spirit wanted me to find it at that exact moment, because that was the moment that I would be able to understand and see him as a human being. And I think there's something very valuable when we can see our parents as human. And it helps us to have a little more grace with ourselves. I'm sorry about your dad.
Thank you.
I have a feeling I'm going to be visited by your dad later saying, why didn't you ask this? Why didn't you ask that?
Maybe. He's getting pretty good at it.
Wow. And you had asked me, when we did the podcast, you had asked me what's on my bucket list.
Mhm.
And I said, I don't have one because I don't like to leave the house. So, but I do have something on my bucket list. It's to wake up each morning.
Oh, I love
Just
that.
like that. I mean, just getting out of bed is another whole thing. If I could wake up, that's half the battle.
Yeah, that's great.
How many of you, does anybody have a bucket list here? Do any of you, have you started that? I think it's a great thing. I am thinking of putting one together just to leave to my kids, to give them something to do after I'm gone.
I mean, they'll appreciate it.
I'm not so sure. My kids don't appreciate it.
Well, you never know.
Any questions before we go? Anybody want to buy a book? Thank you all for coming,
Thank you.
and thank Laura Carney for being here.
Thank you for having me. That was great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you. Great.
We have books over